The rain pounded against the thin roof of Nathan Wright's cabin with such fury that he feared the whole damned thing would cave in before morning. But fever had him pinned to his bed like a butterfly to a board, too weak to even lift his head. He had been sick for 3 days now, alone in this God-forsaken corner of Florissant, Colorado, where the pine trees grew thick and the air bit sharp even in the summer of 1883. The illness had come on sudden, starting with chills that no amount of blankets could chase away, then the fire that burned through his veins until he could barely see straight. Nathan was a proud man, 26 years old and strong as an ox under normal circumstances, but this sickness had brought him low in a way that no bronco or bar fight ever had. Through the haze of fever, he heard something that did not fit with the storm. Footsteps, light and careful on his porch. He tried to call out, to warn whoever it was that they should not come near, that whatever he had might be catching, but his voice came out as nothing more than a croak. The door did not open. Instead, he heard movement above him, on the roof itself. Someone was climbing up there in the middle of this downpour. Nathan wanted to get up, wanted to see who the hell was fool enough to be out in weather like this, but his body refused to cooperate. The fever dragged him down into darkness and he surrendered to it, dimly aware of sounds above his head. Hammering, the scrape of wood on wood. Then nothing. When Nathan woke, sunlight was streaming through his window with an intensity that made him squint. His head felt clearer than it had in days, though his body was still weak as a newborn calf. He lay there for a moment, taking stock of himself. The fever had broken. His nightshirt was soaked through with sweat, but the terrible heat had left him. Slowly, carefully, he sat up. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. He looked up at the ceiling, remembering the sounds from the night before. The steady drip, drip, drip that had been driving him mad for weeks was gone. Nathan pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly, and made his way outside. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind that followed a hard rain in the mountains. He walked around the side of his cabin and stared up at the roof. Fresh wooden shingles covered the section that had been leaking. The work was solid, better than he could have done himself if he was being honest. Whoever had done this knew their way around a hammer and nails. Nathan stood there in his bare feet, staring at that roof, trying to make sense of it. He had no family in Florissant, few friends if he was being truthful. He kept to himself mostly, worked his small ranch, traded his horses when he had them ready, and stayed out of town except when necessity drove him there. Who would care enough to fix his roof? And in the middle of a storm, no less, while he lay inside burning up with fever. He went back inside and found a scrap of paper on his table that had not been there before. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and brief. "You needed help. Consider us even now." Even, Nathan turned the paper over looking for more, but that was all. He did not recognize the handwriting. Consider us even now. That meant he had done something for someone, something he did not even remember. He spent the next week recovering his strength, the mystery of the roof gnawing at him like a persistent itch. As soon as he could ride without feeling like he might fall off his horse, Nathan headed into town. Florissant was not much to look at, just a scatter of buildings along the road where folks who worked the ranches and mines came to get supplies and swap news. The general store sat at the center of it all, run by a man named Eb Tucker, who knew everyone's business. Nathan tied his horse outside and went in. Eb was behind the counter, sorting through a shipment of canned goods. He looked up when Nathan entered and his eyebrows rose. "Well, hell, Nathan. Heard you were at death's door." "Who told you that?" "The Parson woman. She came through about a week ago, said she had stopped by your place and found you burning up with fever. Said she did what she could, but you needed prayers more than medicine." Eb squinted at him. "Guess the prayers worked." Nathan felt a shock run through him. Parson woman, Judith Parson. That is the one. You know her, he knew her, or he had known her briefly. It had been back in the spring, nearly 4 months ago now. Nathan had been driving a small herd of horses to Colorado Springs to sell when he came across a wagon broken down on the side of the road. A woman had been standing there, hands on her hips, glaring at the busted wheel like she could fix it with sheer force of will. She had been alone, which was foolish in these parts, but when Nathan had stopped to help, she had thanked him with a dignity that suggested she was not used to needing assistance. Her name was Judith Parson, she had told him. She was traveling west from Kansas, looking for work as a schoolteacher. The towns out here were desperate for educated folks, she said, and she had heard Florissant might need someone. Nathan had fixed her wheel, refusing payment, and they had talked for maybe half an hour while he worked. She had a sharp wit and eyes the color of sage, and he had found himself sorry when it was time to move on, but he had not seen her since. He had assumed she had moved on to some other town. She is still in Florissant, Nathan asked. Ebb shrugged. Don't know if she still is. She took a room above the saloon for a bit, did some sewing work for Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, but I have not seen her in a few days. He paused, giving Nathan a shrewd look. Why, she do something. She fixed my roof. Did she now? Ebb's grin was knowing. That is a fine thing for a woman to do for a man. Nathan left before Ebb could say anything else. He went to the saloon, but the owner said Judith had moved out 3 days prior. He tried the boarding house next. Mrs. Chen was a tiny Chinese woman who ran the cleanest establishment in town and took no nonsense from anyone. Miss Judith, Mrs. Chen said when Nathan asked. Yes, she stayed here a short time. She left yesterday morning, took the stage. The stage? Where was she headed? Denver, I think. She said she had found work there, teaching position. Mrs. Chen studied him with dark, intelligent eyes. You are the rancher she spoke of, the one who helped her with her wagon. She mentioned me. She said you were kind. That kindness should be repaid. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. She asked about you. I told her where your ranch was. That was perhaps 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. Right around when his roof started leaking worse than ever when the fever took hold. Judith had come to his place, found him sick, and instead of just leaving him to whatever fate had in store, she had climbed onto his roof in the middle of a rainstorm and fixed it. Then she had slipped away without waking him, leaving nothing but a note. Consider us even now. Nathan rode back to his ranch with his thoughts churning. He should let it go. She had repaid the favor she felt she owed, and now she was gone to Denver to start her new life. That was sensible. That was what made sense. But something in his chest ached at the thought of never seeing her again, of never getting to thank her properly, of never hearing her voice or seeing the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. He tried to settle back into his routine. The horses needed tending, the fences needed mending, and the hay would not cut itself. But every time he looked at his roof, he thought of Judith Parson climbing up there in the dark and the rain, doing hard work for a man she barely knew because he had once helped her when she needed it. A week passed. Then 2. Nathan found himself growing more restless with each day. He told himself he was being a fool, that chasing after a woman who had made it clear she wanted to move on was the kind of thing only idiots did in dime novels. But the truth was simpler and more stubborn than logic. He could not stop thinking about her. Finally, on a morning when the autumn chill was just starting to creep into the air, Nathan made his decision. He would go to Denver. He would find Judith Parson and thank her properly for what she had done. And if there was a chance, even a small one, that she might be happy to see him, well, he would deal with that when the time came. He spent 2 days getting his affairs in order, arranging for his neighbor, an older rancher named Tom Davies, to look after his stock while he was gone. Tom asked no questions, just nodded and said he would see to it. That was the way of things out here. People minded their own business, and when they helped, they did it without expecting a story in return. The stage to Denver left from Colorado Springs, which meant a hard day's ride south. Nathan set out before dawn, pushing his horse steady but not cruel. The land spread out around him in rolls of brown and gold, the mountains rising to the west like the backbone of the world. He had lived in Colorado for 5 years now, ever since leaving Missouri after his father died and his mother remarried. The West had seemed like freedom then, a place where a man could make his own way without the weight of family expectations. He had found that freedom in a way, but he had also found loneliness. He reached Colorado Springs as the sun was setting, stabled his horse, and found a cheap room for the night. The stage left at 8 in the morning, rattling and swaying its way north toward Denver. Nathan sat inside with a drummer selling patent medicines, an older couple who looked like they were returning from visiting family, and a young man in a suit who kept consulting a pocket watch as if staring at it would make the journey go faster. Denver was a different creature than Florissant. Where Florissant was quiet and small, Denver was loud and growing, buildings going up on every corner as people flooded in looking for opportunity. The railroad had reached the city years before, and now it was transforming from a rough mining town into something that fancied itself civilized. Nathan climbed down from the stage feeling out of place in his worn range clothes and dusty boots. He started his search at the schools. There were several now, scattered across different parts of the city. The first 2 had never heard of Judith Parson. The third, a tidy brick building near the center of town, had a headmistress who looked at him suspiciously when he asked. "I am a friend," Nathan said, twisting his hat in his hands. "She did me a kindness and I wanted to thank her." The headmistress, a stern woman with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, studied him for a long moment. "Miss Parson is an excellent teacher," she said finally. "She has only been with us for 3 weeks, but the children adore her. I would not want her bothered by unwelcome attention." "It is not unwelcome," Nathan said, though he realized he had no way of knowing if that was true. "At least, I hope it is not. I just want to speak with her." Something in his face must have convinced the headmistress, because she sighed. "She rooms at Mrs. Hartley's boarding house on 15th Street. But if you cause her any trouble, young man, you will answer to me." Nathan promised he would be respectful, and the headmistress gave him directions. His heart was beating fast as he walked through the streets of Denver. What would he even say to Judith? Thank you seemed inadequate for what she had done. And what if she did not want to see him? What if the note she had left was her way of closing that door permanently? Mrs. Hartley's boarding house was a neat 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. Nathan knocked on the door and a plump woman with kind eyes answered. "I am looking for Judith Parson," he said. "And you are, Nathan Wright. I am a friend from Florissant." Mrs. Hartley's expression brightened. "Oh, you must be the rancher she mentioned. She said you were a good man." Come in, come in. Judith is upstairs in her room. I will fetch her." Nathan waited in the front parlor, his hat in his hands, feeling more nervous than he had since he was a boy. He heard footsteps on the stairs, light and quick, and then Judith appeared in the doorway. She looked just as he remembered, maybe more beautiful. Her dark blonde hair was pinned up neatly, and she wore a simple dress the color of twilight. Her sage-green eyes widened when she saw him. "Nathan," she said, and her voice held surprise but not displeasure. "What are you doing in Denver?" He stood, suddenly feeling like all the words he had prepared had fled his head. "I came to thank you," he said, "for the roof, for taking care of me when I was sick." Her cheeks flushed slightly. You did not need to come all this way for that. I was simply repaying a debt. It was more than that, Nathan said. You climbed onto my roof in the middle of a storm. You could have been hurt. Judith's lips curved into a small smile. I grew up on a farm in Kansas, Nathan. I have fixed more roofs than I can count, and you looked like you were dying. I could not just leave without doing something. Why did you leave without waking me? Without saying goodbye? She looked away, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said quietly, because I did not trust myself to leave if I stayed. The words hung in the air between them. Nathan took a step closer. What if I do not want you to leave? Judith met his eyes, and he saw uncertainty there, mixed with something that might have been hope. We barely know each other. Then let me change that. Let me take you to dinner. Let me spend time with you and see if what I think I feel is real. He took a breath. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I fixed your wagon wheel, and when I woke up and found what you had done, found that note, I knew I could not let you just disappear from my life. She was quiet for a long moment, and Nathan felt his heart sinking. Then she said, There is a restaurant 2 blocks from here. They serve a decent roast chicken. We could go there. Relief and joy surged through him. I would like that very much. They walked to the restaurant side by side, not touching but close enough that Nathan was acutely aware of her presence. The evening was mild, and the streets were busy with people finishing their workdays. They found a table by the window, and for the first few minutes they focused on ordering food, both of them suddenly shy. But once the meal came, conversation began to flow. Judith told him about her life in Kansas, how she had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died of cholera when she was young. She had always loved learning, and her grandmother had scrimped and saved to send her to a teaching college in Topeka. When her grandmother passed 2 years ago, Judith had decided to head west, looking for a fresh start. Nathan told her about his own past, about growing up in Missouri as the youngest of 3 sons, about leaving when his father's ranch went to his oldest brother and there was nothing left for him. He talked about the years he had spent drifting, working as a ranch hand and a horse breaker, before finally saving enough to buy his own small spread near Florissant. It is not much, he said. 20 acres and a cabin that is barely standing, but it is mine. That matters, Judith said. Owning something that is yours, building something with your own hands. I understand that. As they talked, Nathan found himself falling deeper into fascination. Judith was smart and funny, with a way of seeing the world that was both practical and idealistic. She cared deeply about her students, talked about them with a warmth that made him smile. She had strong opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and she was not afraid to disagree with him when their views diverged. The dinner stretched into 2 hours, then 3. Finally, the restaurant owner began giving them pointed looks, and they realized they were the last customers. Nathan walked Judith back to the boarding house, and they stood on the porch under the yellow glow of the lamp. Thank you for coming all this way, Judith said softly. I thought I would never see you again. Can I see you tomorrow? Nathan asked. I am staying in Denver for a few days. I would like to spend that time with you if you are willing. She nodded, her eyes bright. I would like that. Nathan left feeling like he was walking on air. Over the next 3 days, he and Judith spent every moment they could together. He met her after school and they walked through the city, talking and laughing. They visited a museum one afternoon, and Nathan found himself more interested in watching Judith's reactions to the paintings than in the art itself. They shared meals and stories, and with each passing hour, Nathan became more certain that what he felt was not infatuation but something real and lasting. On the 4th day, Nathan knew he had to return to Florissant. His money was running low, and Tom could not watch his ranch forever. He met Judith in a small park near the boarding house, and they sat on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree that was just starting to turn gold. "I have to go back tomorrow," Nathan said, and the words felt heavy. Judith nodded. She had known this was coming. "I know. Come with me." She looked at him sharply. "What? Come back to Florissant? Not right away. I know you have your teaching position. But at the end of the school term, come back. Give us a chance to see what this could be." "Nathan, that is months away, almost a full year. I know, and I will wait. I will come visit when I can, and we can write letters. But I need to know that there is something to wait for." He took her hand, and she did not pull away. "I am falling in love with you, Judith. Maybe I already have. And I think maybe you feel something for me too." Judith's eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling. "You are a fool, Nathan Wright, probably, but I am a fool who is serious about this." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I do feel something for you. I have since that day on the road. When I fixed your roof, it was not just about repaying a debt. I wanted to help you because the thought of you suffering alone broke my heart." Nathan turned to face her, cupping her cheek with his hand. "Then give us a chance, please." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. I will come back when the term ends. We will see where this leads." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, and she kissed him back. It was a promise sealed with that touch, a commitment to something neither of them fully understood yet but both wanted desperately to explore. Nathan left Denver the next morning, his heart both full and aching. The months ahead would be long, but he had something to hold on to now. He had Judith's promise. The journey back to Florissant felt shorter than the trip out had been, though Nathan knew that was just his mind playing tricks. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy, preparing for the winter and for the future. He began making improvements to his cabin, fixing things he had let slide for too long. If Judith was going to come to his home, he wanted it to be worthy of her. The first letter from Judith arrived 2 weeks after he returned, delivered by the stage driver who knew to drop mail for Nathan at Tucker's store. Nathan read it standing right there in the aisle, ignoring Ebb's curious looks. Judith wrote about her students, about the city, about how much she missed talking with him. The letter was 3 pages long, and Nathan read it 5 times before carefully folding it and putting it in his pocket. He wrote back that night, laboring over the words. Nathan had never been much for writing, but he wanted to tell Judith everything. About the way the aspens had turned brilliant gold, about the first snow that had fallen last week, about the new foal one of his mares had delivered. He told her he missed her, that he thought about her every day. The letters became a lifeline through the long Colorado winter. They arrived every 2 weeks or so, and Nathan treasured each one. Judith's words painted pictures of her life in Denver, and Nathan tried to do the same with his descriptions of ranch life. Sometimes the letters were lighthearted, full of small observations and jokes. Other times they were deeper, sharing hopes and fears and dreams. In December, Nathan made the journey to Denver again, timing it with the school's winter break. He stayed for 4 days, and they were some of the happiest of his life. He and Judith walked through the snow-covered streets, attended a Christmas concert at a church, and spent hours simply sitting together, talking about everything and nothing. When he left, the parting was harder than before, but they both held on to the knowledge that the time was growing shorter. Winter gave way to spring, and the mountains around Florissant burst into life. Nathan worked from dawn to dusk, building up his herd, breaking horses to sell, and continuing to improve his property. He built a small addition onto the cabin, a second room that could serve as a study or a bedroom for future children. The thought made him both nervous and excited. In April, Judith wrote that the school term would end the first week of June. She would need a few weeks to settle her affairs in Denver, but she would take the stage to Colorado Springs around the 20th. Nathan wrote back immediately, saying he would meet her there. The weeks crawled by. Nathan was a mess of anticipation and nerves. He cleaned his cabin until it shone, planted a small vegetable garden, and even bought new curtains from Mrs. Chen, who seemed pleased to be in on the secret. Tom Davies stopped by one evening and found Nathan pacing the porch. "You are going to wear a groove in those boards," Tom said. "She is coming in 3 days," Nathan said. Tom grinned. "About time you found yourself a good woman. The loneliness out here can kill a man slower than a bullet, but just as sure." On June 19th, Nathan rode to Colorado Springs. He was a day early, but he could not stand waiting any longer. He got a room at a hotel and spent the evening trying to calm his nerves. What if Judith had changed her mind? What if the time apart had made her realize she did not want this life? But when the stage rolled in the next afternoon and Judith stepped down, her eyes immediately found his in the crowd, and the smile that lit her face banished all his doubts. Nathan pushed through the people and caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet. She laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. "I am here," she said against his shoulder. "I am really here." "I know," Nathan said, reluctant to let her go. "I can hardly believe it." They retrieved her trunk and bags, loading them onto the wagon Nathan had brought. The ride back to Florissant took most of the afternoon. They talked non-stop, catching up on the small things that letters could not quite capture. Judith told him about saying goodbye to her students, about the tears and hugs and the cards they had made for her. Nathan told her about the new foal, now gangly and curious, and about the addition he had built onto the cabin. "You built a new room?" Judith asked. "I wanted you to have space for your books and things," Nathan said, "and I thought maybe someday it could be a nursery." Judith was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took his hand. "You have thought about this a lot." "Every day," Nathan admitted. When they reached the ranch, Nathan helped Judith down from the wagon and led her inside. She looked around the cabin, taking in the clean floors, the new curtains, the shelves Nathan had built into the walls. She saw the second room and stepped inside, her hand over her mouth. "Nathan, this is beautiful. It is just a room. It is more than that." She turned to face him. "It is a promise." He crossed to her and took both her hands. "Marry me, Judith. I know we have not had as much time together as most people do before they make this decision, but I know my heart. I love you. I want to build a life with you. Will you be my wife?" Judith's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in Florissant's small church, with Tom Davies standing as Nathan's witness and Mrs. Chen as Judith's. The ceremony was simple, but when Nathan slipped the gold band onto Judith's finger and kissed her as his wife, he felt like the richest man in the territory. The early days of their marriage were a period of adjustment. Judith had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the endless chores and hard work that came with it. But she threw herself into it with the same determination she brought to everything else. She learned to milk the cow Nathan had bought, to tend the chickens, to help with the horses. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains, and Nathan would think that he had never been happier. Judith brought changes to the ranch that Nathan had not anticipated but quickly grew to love. She started a larger garden, growing vegetables and herbs that she preserved for the winter. She began holding informal lessons for the few children who lived on nearby ranches, teaching them to read and do sums around the kitchen table. She made the cabin into a real home, with touches of beauty and comfort that Nathan would never have thought to add. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, and there were times when Nathan worried about making ends meet. A hard early snowstorm in October killed 2 of his best horses, a financial blow that stung. But Judith never complained. She took in sewing work, mended clothes for other ranchers, and helped stretch every penny. In the spring of their second year together, Judith told Nathan she was pregnant. The news filled him with a mixture of joy and terror. What if something went wrong? What if he was not good enough as a father? But Judith was calm and confident, and her strength steadied him. Their son was born in November of 1885, during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was long and hard, and Nathan paced the floor while Mrs. Chen and another ranch wife attended Judith. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Chen brought the baby out, a tiny red-faced creature with a shock of dark hair. "You have a son," she said, placing the baby in Nathan's arms. Nathan stared down at his child, overwhelmed. The baby's eyes were closed, his little fists waving. He was perfect. "Can I see Judith?" Nathan asked. "She is tired, but yes, go see your wife." Judith was propped up in bed, her face pale but smiling. Nathan sat beside her and carefully placed their son in her arms. She looked down at the baby with such love that Nathan felt his throat tighten. "What should we name him?" Judith asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Nathan said, "What about Samuel, after your grandfather?" Judith's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel. Yes, that is perfect." Samuel Wright was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of their world. Nathan had never known he could love someone so fiercely, so protectively. He would hold Samuel for hours, watching him sleep, marveling at every tiny feature. Judith was a natural mother, patient and loving even during the sleepless nights. As Samuel grew, the ranch grew with him. Nathan's reputation as a skilled horse breaker spread, and he began getting more business than he could handle alone. He hired a young man named James to help with the work, and the extra income allowed them to expand. They bought more land, increased the herd, and built a proper barn. When Samuel was 2, Judith became pregnant again. This time, Nathan was less terrified and more excited. Their daughter, Grace, was born in the summer of 1888, a tiny thing with Judith's sage green eyes. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with everything. The years rolled by, full and rich. Nathan and Judith built a life that was sometimes hard but always rewarding. They worked side by side, raised their children, and supported each other through good times and bad. Samuel grew into a sturdy boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Grace was quiet and thoughtful, always with a book in her hand. In 1891, Judith started a proper school in Florissant, teaching out of a small building the town had constructed. Children came from miles around, and Judith poured herself into the work she loved. Nathan was proud of her, proud of the difference she was making. One evening in the fall of 1892, nearly 10 years after Nathan had first ridden to Denver to find Judith, they sat on their porch watching Samuel and Grace play in the yard. Samuel was 7 now, tall for his age, and Grace was 4, her blonde hair catching the last light of the sun. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Giving up the city, the opportunities you might have had there?" Judith looked at him, surprised. "Never. This is where I belong. With you, with our children, with this life we have built together." She reached over and took his hand. "Do you remember the night you found my note? The night I fixed your roof and left? I remember thinking I could not let you go. I remember hoping you would come after me. I left that note because I thought maybe, just maybe, you would care enough to find me." She smiled. "You did. You came all the way to Denver for me. Best decision I ever made." Judith leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what I wrote in that note? Consider us even now." "I remember. "I was wrong. We could never be even, Nathan. What we have is not about debts or favors. It is about love. It is about choosing each other every day." Nathan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I will always choose you." They sat there as the sun set, their children's laughter ringing in the air, and Nathan felt a deep contentment settle over him. The journey that had started with a broken wagon wheel and a leaking roof had led him here, to this moment, to this life. He thought about all the small choices and chance encounters that had brought him and Judith together, and he was grateful for everyone. As the years continued to pass, Nathan and Judith's love only deepened. They faced challenges together: harsh winters, financial difficulties, the inevitable losses that came with ranch life. But they also experienced profound joys: watching their children grow, celebrating milestones, building a community in Florissant. Samuel developed into a fine young man, skilled with horses like his father and with a quick mind. Grace followed her mother's path, showing a love of learning and a gift for teaching. In 1899, when Grace was 11 and Samuel was 14, Judith became pregnant once more, surprising them both. She was 38 now, older than she had been with the other children, and Nathan worried. But Judith was healthy and strong, and in the spring of 1900, she gave birth to twin boys, Joseph and James. The twins brought new energy to the household. Samuel and Grace doted on their baby brothers, helping care for them. Nathan, now 43, found himself a father of young children again, and while it was exhausting, it was also a joy. He and Judith would laugh together at night about how their family had grown, how their little cabin had expanded into a proper ranch house with multiple rooms. In 1903, Samuel married a young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the property. Nathan gave them a portion of the land, pleased to see his son settling nearby. Grace went to teaching college in Colorado Springs, coming home during summers and holidays. The twins were rambunctious and full of energy, keeping Nathan and Judith on their toes. One evening in 1905, as Nathan and Judith sat on the porch, they reflected on the 20 years they had been together. The ranch was prosperous. Their children were healthy and thriving, and they had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. "Remember when I found you in that cabin, burning with fever?" Judith said. "I was so scared. You were barely conscious, and I thought you might die. I remember waking up and finding you gone, finding that roof fixed and wondering who had cared enough to do it. I climbed up there in the pouring rain, hammering in shingles, and all I could think was that I could not let you suffer. I could not let the rain keep coming through while you lay there sick." Judith shook her head, smiling. "It was foolish and dangerous, but I would do it again. I rode all the way to Denver to find you, and I was terrified you would not want to see me. I had hoped you would come. I left before you woke because I knew if I saw you, if you asked me to stay, I might have given up everything I had worked for. I needed to know that what I felt was real, that you felt it too." Nathan turned to her, taking her hand. "It was real. It is real. 20 years later, and I love you more than I did the day we married." Judith's eyes glistened. "I love you too. You gave me a home, a family, a life beyond anything I imagined." They sat together as the stars came out, the same mountains rising around them that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The twins were inside, hopefully settling down for the night. Samuel and Catherine were in their own home nearby. Grace was in Colorado Springs but would be home for Christmas. Life was good. As the years rolled into the 20th century, Nathan and Judith aged gracefully together. Nathan's hair turned silver, and his face became weathered from years of outdoor work, but he remained strong and capable. Judith kept her beauty, though lines appeared around her eyes and her hair faded to a soft gray blonde. They worked together as they always had, partners in every sense of the word. In 1910, Samuel and Catherine gave them their first grandchild, a girl they named Judith after her grandmother. The joy of holding that baby, of seeing his son become a father, moved Nathan in ways he had not expected. He thought about his own father, long dead now, and hoped he would have been proud of the man Nathan had become, the family he had raised. Grace married in 1912, a teacher she met in Colorado Springs, and they settled in that city. She visited often, bringing her husband to meet the family. The twins, now 12, were growing fast and showing signs of the men they would become. Joseph was quiet and studious, while James was outgoing and adventurous. In 1915, Nathan turned 58 and Judith was 54. They were grandparents several times over now, with Samuel and Catherine having 3 children and Grace expecting her second. The ranch was still thriving, though Nathan had turned over much of the day-to-day work to Samuel. He still worked with the horses, unable to fully give up the thing he loved, but he moved slower now, his joints protesting the cold mornings. One spring day, Nathan and Judith rode out to a high meadow on their property, a place they had always loved for its view of the mountains. They dismounted and sat on a fallen log, looking out over the landscape they had called home for more than 30 years. "I have been thinking about that roof a lot lately," Nathan said. Judith laughed. "The roof, after all these years. It is where everything started in a way. You fixing that roof, me waking up to find it done. It was such a simple thing, but it changed my life. It changed mine, too. I could have just left you a bottle of medicine and gone on my way, but something made me stay, made me want to help you in a real way. I am glad you did. I am glad you climbed up there in the rain and fixed my roof. I am glad I was foolish enough to ride all the way to Denver to find you. I am glad you said yes when I asked you to come back, when I asked you to marry me." Judith leaned against him. "We have had a good life, Nathan. A really good life." "The best," he agreed. They sat there for a long time, wrapped in memories and contentment. The years ahead would bring more changes, more joys and sorrows, but they would face them together as they always had. The cowboy and the woman who had fixed his roof had built something lasting, something beautiful. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, Samuel and the grandchildren were there waiting. Little Judith, now 5 years old, ran to greet them, and Nathan scooped her up, laughing at her excited chatter. Judith stood beside him, smiling at the scene, at the family they had created together. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Nathan and Judith lay together in the darkness of their room. The same room where Nathan had once burned with fever, where he had dimly heard someone on his roof in the rain. So much had changed since that night, yet the core of who they were remained the same. "Thank you," Nathan whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Judith asked. "For fixing my roof, for saving my life, for loving me." Judith found his hand and squeezed it. "Thank you for coming after me. For not letting me go. For building this beautiful life with me." They fell asleep holding hands, just as they had countless nights before, just as they would countless nights to come. The roof Nathan had worried would cave in all those years ago stood strong above them, repaired by the hands of the woman he loved. It was a fitting metaphor for their marriage, something broken made whole, something weak made strong through love and effort and the willingness to show up for each other, even in the rain, even in the dark. The years continued their steady march. The twins grew into young men, both choosing to stay in Florissant and work the ranch with their father and brother. Joseph married in 1920, and James followed in 1922. The ranch that had started as 20 acres and a barely standing cabin was now a thriving operation, passed down through generations, worked by the family Nathan and Judith had created. In 1925, Nathan and Judith celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered for a party at the ranch house. Samuel, now 40 years old, stood up to make a toast. "My parents have shown us what love looks like," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They have worked hard every day of their lives, supported each other through everything, and built something that will last long after they are gone. Dad, Mom, thank you for the example you have set. Thank you for the love you have shown us." Nathan looked at Judith, saw the tears on her cheeks, and felt his own eyes burning. 40 years. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed, yet also felt like no time at all. He remembered the young woman who had fixed his roof, the way she had looked standing in the parlor of Mrs. Hartley's boarding house when he had come to find her. He remembered the nervous anticipation of meeting her in Colorado Springs, the joy of their wedding day, the terror and wonder of holding their first child. "I would do it all again," Nathan said, speaking to the room but looking at Judith. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose this life, this woman, this family, again and again." Judith reached for his hand, and their children and grandchildren applauded. It was a moment of perfect happiness, the kind that comes from a life well lived and love well shared. As they grew older, Nathan and Judith slowed down. Nathan's joints ached more, and he finally had to admit he could no longer work the horses the way he once had. Judith's eyesight began to fail, and she had to give up her beloved reading in the evenings. But they adapted, found new rhythms, and continued to cherish each day they had together. In the spring of 1928, Nathan became ill. It started as a cough, something he dismissed as a cold, but it lingered and worsened. Judith insisted he see a doctor, and the diagnosis was pneumonia. Nathan fought it, drawing on the same strength that had carried him through decades of hard living. But at 71, his body was not as resilient as it had once been. For weeks, Judith nursed him, just as she had that long-ago night when fever had laid him low. She sat by his bed, held his hand, and told him stories of their life together. Samuel and the other children visited daily, and the house was full of the family Nathan and Judith had created. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Nathan opened his eyes and found Judith sitting beside him. She looked tired, her face lined with worry, but she smiled when she saw he was awake. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Tired," Nathan admitted, "but better when I look at you." Judith's smile wavered. "You are a charmer even on your sick. I learned from the best." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Do you remember the note you left me? All those years ago, 'Consider us even now,'" Judith quoted. "How could I forget? We were never even, Judith. You gave me everything. A life, a family, happiness beyond measure. I can never repay that." "You gave me the same," Judith said, tears streaming down her face. "We gave each other everything." Nathan fought the illness for another week, and then, on a quiet morning with Judith holding his hand and his children gathered around, he slipped away peacefully. He was 71 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Judith grieved deeply, as one would expect after losing a partner of more than 40 years. But she was surrounded by love, by the family she and Nathan had built. Samuel took over the ranch completely now, running it with the same care and dedication his father had shown. The grandchildren, some of them now adults with children of their own, rallied around her. Judith lived for another 7 years, spending her days surrounded by family, tending a small garden and telling stories of Nathan to anyone who would listen. She spoke of the day he had fixed her wagon wheel, of the roof she had repaired in the rain, of the moment he had appeared in Denver to find her. She told the story of their love over and over, making sure it would be remembered. In the summer of 1935, at the age of 74, Judith passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Nathan in the small cemetery in Florissant, under a headstone that read, "Judith Parson Wright, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." She fixed what was broken and made it whole. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. Samuel's children worked it, and then their children after them. The story of Nathan and Judith became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The cabin where it had all started was preserved, even as the ranch house grew and modernized around it. Visitors could still see the room Nathan had built for Judith, the shelves he had installed, and if they looked closely at the roof, the section where Judith had hammered in new shingles on a rainy night in 1883. The love story that had begun with a simple act of kindness, a wagon wheel fixed by a lonely rancher and repaid by a determined woman climbing onto a roof in a storm, had created a legacy that would last for generations. It was a testament to the power of choosing love, of showing up for each other, of building something beautiful from the raw materials of faith and commitment. Nathan and Judith had not known, that day on the road when they first met, that they were beginning a journey that would span decades and create a family that would number in the dozens. They had simply been two people helping each other, recognizing something in the other that spoke to their own lonely hearts. But from that small beginning, they had built an empire of love, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In the years that followed, their great-grandchildren would walk the land Nathan and Judith had worked, ride horses descended from the ones Nathan had broken, and learn in schools that followed the model Judith had established. They would hear the stories and marvel at the courage it must have taken for Judith to climb onto that roof in the rain, for Nathan to ride to Denver on nothing but hope, for both of them to choose love when it would have been easier to walk away. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and the wind whispered through the pines, those who believed in such things said they could feel the presence of Nathan and Judith still, watching over the land they had loved, the family they had raised, the legacy they had built together. The cowboy and the woman who had fixed his roof, together forever in the place where they had chosen each other, where they had built a life, where their love had transformed a simple cabin and 20 acres into a home that would shelter generations. Their story was one of the American West, of hard work and determination, of the kind of love that builds nations and families. It was a story that began with kindness repaid and blossomed into something eternal. It was, in the end, a story of two souls who found each other against the odds and refused to let go, who worked together to create something beautiful out of the harsh and unforgiving landscape of frontier life. The roof Judith had fixed still stood, more than 50 years after she had climbed up there in the rain. It had been repaired and reinforced over the years, but some of the original shingles remained, a physical reminder of the night everything had changed. And whenever it rained, the family would gather inside the old cabin, safe and dry, and remember the woman who had made it so, the man who had loved her for it, and the life they had built together beneath that very roof. It was a good story, a true story, and it was theirs.